PowerPoint. There we go.
Mhm.
All right, so I'll start out by going over some of the more common terms that you'll hear me say and hear a lot of people say when it comes to tree ID. Talk a little bit about what are the main things that we look for as far as tree ID, and then I'll go over some of the trees that we're going to see on our hike later today. And there are also some pretty common trees to see in Ohio and Kentucky, so it kind of works both ways. Some of these common terms, a lot of them, or some of them may be ones that you hear a lot, like the deciduous and coniferous. Deciduous, they drop leaves every fall. They're your oaks, maples, things like that. Coniferous, those are the evergreens. They keep their leaves. They don't have that cycle of dropping their leaves and regrowing them. As far as looking at the twigs, which is the main part of tree ID in the winter, is those twigs, because they are what is most visible besides the bark. So on each twig, you'll have a terminal bud, which is at the very end of the twig. That is the growing point for next year's twig. That is where it will extend. The lateral buds are on the sides of the twig, and they are the growing points for next year's leaf or flowers. These are very useful because they can tell you what the leaf arrangement is on the tree. So even though there's not leaves, you can look at those buds and tell, is it opposite, are they alternate, or whorled, which is very, very helpful. Another thing is bud scale scar, which is kind of a little, it's on the end of the twig. It is where last year's terminal bud was, where it fell off. It's just kind of a flat place, and those can have specific shaping that can clue you into what type of twig or what type of tree it is. One thing you can see on some trees is lenticels, which are just kind of little dots. Those are used for the oxygen and gas exchange in some trees. Not all trees have them. They can be they look very different depending on the tree and depending on the age of the tree. So I don't pay attention to those as much because it gets into trickiness. Leaf scar is similar to the bud scale scar. It's where last year's leaf was. It's on the side of the twig. Some trees have very obvious ones or very distinctive ones. Like Tree of Heaven, or Tree of Heaven has the bud scale scar, is the one that's very distinctive. And of course, that's a invasive tree, so but we still want to be able to identify it because it is invasive. A bundle scar is inside the leaf scar. It'll be a little collection of dots, 3, 5, whatever, little dots, and that is where the vascular system connected to the leaf, where that xylem and phloem and all of those nice nutrients went into the leaf from that tree. And then the last thing is the pith, which is the very center of the twig. If you cut open a twig, either kind of prune it on the side or dissect it, you'll see this kind of center column in the middle, and some of those have a distinctive shape or formation that a lot of people will use. I tend to not pay as much attention to pith because I don't love to chop open twigs. I mean, it's not going to hurt the tree, but it's kind of a more intense identification. So as far as the leaf arrangement, you've got your opposite leaves, which is just as it goes on the twig, the opposite leaves come out exactly opposite each other. So a lot of the main trees that you'll find that have opposite leaves are ashes, maples, dogwoods, buckeyes, and elderberries. So that's a good clue. Alternate leaves, it's just as the twig goes up, they kind of alternate. So they're kind of offset from each other where the leaves come out. Those can be hickories, walnuts, oaks, elms, cherries, sycamores, cottonwoods, mulberries, etc. There's a lot of trees around here that have alternate leaves. So really, if you notice it has opposite leaves, that'll give you a much better kind of narrowing down clue. And then the other one, the last kind of a leaf arrangement is whorled, which is it just kind of it makes a circular arrangement where the twigs or the leaves are coming off kind of in a circle around the twig, and we'll see a couple of examples of that. That is buttonbush, catalpa, and a lot of conifers have that. So the main things that we look at as far as winter tree identification, we'll look at whether it's deciduous or coniferous. That's kind of the big main one. Does it have needles or does it still have leaves? That'll narrow things down a lot. The next thing is really looking at that twig and looking at what are the buds look like? What are their shape, size, texture? Where are they? The next thing is bark texture. If you're really good at bark identification, this is a great one. I'm with bark identification. Sometimes, people will look at the pith. Like I said, it's a bit more of a in-depth way of identifying trees. So I don't tend to. And then if you're really feeling it, you can look at the leaves on the ground around the tree, but take care because the leaves move. And when you have a lot of trees in the same area, they all of their leaves fall in the same place. So, it's not the most precise when they're not on the tree. So we'll get into some of the trees that we'll see on the hike later. The first are oaks. So we have red oak and a white oak. And I found a really great comparison of their bark there. So you can see that red oak it's still like a ridged bark, but it's a lot smoother than that white oak. That white oak has much deeper furrows in it. A lot of oaks tend to have buds that are like kind of clustered at the ends of the twig. So that can clue you into, if you see a twig with a lot of buds at the end, oh, that might be an oak. So you start looking in further there. Oaks have alternate leaf arrangements. So that's another thing that can clue you in, this might be an oak. On red oaks, the terminal and lateral buds are both kind of pointed and they are scaled. So if you look closely, you can kind of see they've got a kind of texture to them. And that's just kind of like an overlapping scales going up the side of the bud. Whereas with white oak, those buds are a lot more rounded. So you can see they're kind of a more bulb shape. And they are also scaled. Another thing with the white oak is that those ridges can sometimes kind of form blocks. If you look closely. The next one is there's also a shingle oak, which is a very interesting oak to me because the leaves don't have a typical oak shape. They're kind of more smooth and like lobed rather than those, typical oak leaves that we're used to seeing. So the shingle oak has multiple terminal buds. Like I said, they have those groups, that kind of grouped buds at the end of the twig. Their buds are more teardrop shaped and scaled. And you can see there, it's got that alternate leaf arrangement. The bark is also ridged and furrowed like most oaks, and it's kind of in between white oak and red oak. So it's not as deep as white oak, but it's not as smooth as red oak. So it's kind of if you had a red oak, a white oak, and a shingle oak all lined up next to each other, be a great little ingredient. The next one, and we have a lot of these at Bulls Run are red buds. They have those very rounded buds on their terminal and lateral buds. They're kind of scaled. You can kind of see some texture there. Again, they've got that alternate leaf arrangement. And something that's really cool about red buds is they can form these multiple trunk shapes, which always looks really cool. The next one, this is one of my favorites, is hackberry. Their buds are what we call oppressed, which literally means they're pressed against the twig. So they're pretty small. They don't really have a terminal bud at the end of the twig. So that can kind of clue you in. If there's not a real like obvious terminal bud, it might be a hackberry. They also have an alternate leaf arrangement. It's less dramatic than some other ones. They're kind of more closer together. But hackberry is one of the few trees that I actually identify first by its bark, because it has this very distinctive bark where it's smooth, but it's got these kind of ridges on it. Sometimes they're more like circular and they kind of look like warts. When they're young, I always think they kind of look like pimply teenagers because they've got all these little warts going up all the side of them, and they just look kind of pimply. The next one is American hornbeam. And this is the tree that I used to, this is why in the plant world, scientific names are so important, because American hornbeam, I learned it as ironwood, is the common name that I learned it as, but ironwood can also refer to Ostrea virginiana, which is American hop hornbeam, which is a completely different tree, which led to some confusion to me when I was trying to figure out what the heck a ironwood was. I was like, wait, that doesn't look like the tree that I learned. So American hornbeam is Carpinus caroliniana. But yeah, you'll hear it called ironwood, musclewood, blue beech, water beech. It's got all kinds of fun common names. And the reason that it can be called ironwood or musclewood is because that bark kind of looks muscly. It kind of looks tendony, and it's a really cool, smooth bark. A lot of times it does have multiple trunks. I don't know that I've seen an ironwood with a single trunk before, or at least I haven't noticed it. Almost always I've seen them with that multiple trunk. You can see those buds are really large and they have those very distinctive scaling. And again, they are alternate, but the hackberry and ironwood are the ones that I most often notice them by their bark before anything else. The other one that is really nice to identify by bark is sycamore. It's got that beautiful like bark that starts out, brown at the bottom, and then it flakes as it gets further up, and it has that gorgeous white bark towards the top of the tree. It has very long, smooth buds, and they're kind of pointed. And they also have an alternate leaf arrangement. One thing that sycamores tend to grow near water, but not always. We have a couple at Bulls Run that are at the top of a hill. And I've seen them in other areas where there's not a whole lot of water. But that is one thing that they do tend to be around water. Next is a red maple. So red maple is nice and tricky because it has two different types of twigs, two different types of buds. So it has flower producing and non-flower producing. So that flowering has those multiple scaled terminal buds, which if you're not careful could look oakish. And then on the left, is the non-flowering bud, which is the leaf producing one. And it has just a single terminal bud. And it has that opposite leaf arrangement, which maples have. With red maples, the bark kind of starts out smooth as it's in young maples, but as the tree gets older, it forms these kind of layered flakes. And that's something that sugar maples also kind of do, but sugar maples have almost wings that start peeling off, good, like vertical kind of wings as the tree gets older, which is pretty distinctive. Another great tree, cottonwood. So this is the one that I actually put a picture of the pith because it forms this kind of star shape. So if you trim a cottonwood twig like down the middle, it has kind of a star shape. I couldn't find a real reason that it forms this star shape. I'm not sure that anyone's really done a lot of research into why. It's just kind of a cool thing that happens, I guess. They have very long terminal and lateral buds. You can see they very point along the twig. Again, they have that alternate leaf arrangement. Cottonwood has this really deeply ridged bark, and I actually can occasionally misidentify it as a tulip poplar because tulip poplars also have that very deep ridge bark, and they're in the same family. So, oh, what is that? I don't think I've noticed a cottonwood smell.
It's just a really intense, almost funky smell. It's kind of bitter and sour, especially after it rains.
I'll have to go sniffing around our cottonwoods and next time it rains. I don't think I've ever noticed that before. And then flowering dogwood, which is one of my favorite kind of shrubby trees. It also has two types of twigs, which you can see here. It's got the flower buds, which are they're very bulbous. I mean, they look, if you all know the Pokemon Bulbasaur, like looks exactly like a little, I'm like not a big Pokemon person, but that's like one of the three that I know. That's what it makes me think of. And then the leaf buds have this very pointed end to them.
I've heard the flower buds described as mini onions.
That's also really good. Yeah. Yeah, they definitely look like little bulbs. So they another thing with flowering dogwood is it's like the poster child for like blocky bark. You can see it forms these very distinct little individual kind of plates of bark that yeah, whenever you hear somebody talking about blocky bark, they usually mention the flowering dogwood. There we go. And then the last two trees are getting into those conifers. So we have eastern white pine. It has those very long, thin needles, which are in small clusters attached then to the tree. If you look up the tree, like if you stand underneath a white pine and look up the tree, it's got whorled branch shapes. So the branches are kind of coming from all points in a circle around the trunk. And then it has very furrowed bark with kind of thick ridges. They're very, plate-like going down that tree. My personal favorite conifer that we have, not that I play favorites, is the eastern red cedar. It's got those very flat, scaly leaves. It's got that very distinctive little round blue fruit, which if you crush it, it kind of smells like gin. So, if you're well versed in the scent of gin, you can crush that up and figure out it's a red cedar. But it's also got very distinctive bark that is that reddish brown, and it's just flaking off all over the tree. It looks like the tree is like shedding. That bark is just coming off. So yeah, those are some of the main trees that you'll see around Ohio and that we'll see on our hike later. We'll see a couple of other ones that I didn't put in here just because they're not quite as common. And because it's always fun to throw in a couple surprises. So I know I kind of flew through that. Does anyone have any questions or? Oh, I didn't know that about white pine needles. That's interesting that they turn yellow and drop once the tree is 2 to 3 years old. So they do drop their leaves on I guess on just a longer cycle than deciduous trees. Which I tried to find out exactly why, what is the evolutionary reason that conifers keep their leaves versus dropping them. And I couldn't ever really get a straight answer, either from the internet or from people that know trees better than I do. So I guess, yeah, there's just still some research to be done there. Yes, white pine does tend to have those 5 needles per bunch. Oops. All right, well, if you have any other comments or questions, you can throw them in. We'll meet for those of you that can come, we'll meet at Bulls Run at about 2. Dress very, very, very warm. I was out there yesterday and it was very cold. And I think it's about the same temperature today, so layers. I don't think I've ever heard of a Dawn redwood before. I'll have to look into that. That sounds really cool.
We have one. It's a little under the weather.
Yeah, it's right out front. We'll visit it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Exception to every rule.
The other exception we do not have an example of, it's farther north, is the larcher tamarask. That is a deciduous conifer. But those are the only 2 exceptions to that rule that I can think of.
Does the bald cypress lose its needles?
Yes, it does. I believe so. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it does. I think that's considered a conifer. So the conifers, yeah, the conifers basically are the ones that make cones or have the naked seeds.
Gotcha.
This is the book that does that more. This is the other book that was what I used in field botany. And of course, I happen to take it in the winter. So we use this a lot, which you probably can't read when it's
fruit. I can read it.
Fruit key and twig key. So the first part of the book is on just the fruits, the seeds that it produces, and then the next section is on the twigs itself.
I want to know what Linda's favorite tree is. I forget it. She calls it a muscle man.
You're muted, Linda.
Musclewood.
Musclewood.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the blue beech that she had pictures of, right?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. We do have the hop hornbeam up off the end of the meadow trail, right at the edge of the ridge. So we do have both, and you're right. They don't look a thing alike.
Yeah, I was taught the ironwood or the hornbeam by someone, and then I was trying to like find it again to show to someone because I just loved how the bark looked. And so I was desperately like Googling ironwood, and I'm like, that's not it. That's not what it looks like.
Yeah, hop hornbeam is more of a shreddy dark bark than
Yeah.
the mussel tree. So, any other questions? We'll take a look at some of them out there. We'll see how long we can last in the cold. And is there anybody who is interested in the blue book that we have? Or some, I know some of you have been on this before and probably already have one of these. Is there anybody who needs one?
I have mine.
Okay.
I have mine somewhere.
Okay, well, we have a couple left yet that we'll have along, so. Anything else?
Well, thank you, Kate. And that was a nice
Yep.
presentation.
Great pictures.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, well, I think that'll do it for now, and we'll see you guys over. Is everybody going to try and make it over at least for a little bit, or?
I'm gonna
Yeah,
have
I'm
to
gonna-
see.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. It's a little early for me to feed the birds. Tomorrow's my due date. So I don't know if I want to disrupt my routine or not.
Uh-huh.
I'll just have to check and see how empty they are.
Are you on for this whole month, or how's that work?
Brad and I split January. I'm done on the 31st.
Do you,
So,
Caden, do you know who's on for next month, Marge?
Deb, I can't think of her. Debbie is, and then I can't think of her name. The other master
Karen?
gardener that helps a lot.
Karen?
Karen?
Karen, yes, thank you.
Caden, I didn't know if you were thinking about having the nature tots do it at any point in time, or even just doing one of them. But you might want to coordinate with whoever's is filling the feeders or anything like that. So,
Okay. Yeah, I've got planned to start Thursday and then
right.
do the normal 5-week.
Yeah. How many do you have signed up?
I have gotten one email so far.
Okay. Okay. We'll see. Okay. And we can decide, if it is only going to be one, whether or not you want to make the trip up for that. So we'll talk about that this afternoon. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Caden, for your presentation, and we'll see you out at the Arboretum this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Right.
See you later.